Nicki Williams, so happy to have you here on the podcast. We get another great talk about perimenopause and menopause, something I never really get bored of learning about as a woman in perimenopause. So, we are going to explore that topic and what you have to offer us around that. But let's start out with a little bit about your background and how you got into this space. Yeah, obviously, us females can't not go through this transition time. It's inevitable if we live long enough. So, give us a little bit about your backstory and how you got into this space.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for allowing me to come on. I started this work in my early 40s. So we're talking 15 or so years ago when I started having like kind of health issues like, extra fatigue and mood swings. And I had brain fog and all the usual symptoms we know now to be related to perimenopause. But back then, I didn't know anything about hormones. I worked in corporate. I had nothing to do with health. I had two young children I was looking after, doing all the usual juggle that we do, trying to get, look after the family, the house, my life, my work, and trying not to be rubbish at any of them, trying to be the best at everything. And that, is stressful. And I just put down my symptoms to being, a little bit older and just busy. And it wasn't until I was washing up one night, looking out into the garden and just thinking, I'm just so exhausted. And my daughter ran in, she was 7 at the time, and she wanted to show me a picture drawn at school. It was a giraffe, and said, Mummy, I've done a picture of a giraffe for you. I know it's your favorite animal. And I turned around and I just looked at her and I said, just not now. And I kind of shouted at her. And she ran off in tears, and I just felt like, I'd literally been stabbed in the back. I thought, she actually said to me before she ran off, she said, Mummy, why are you always so? And like, oh my God, I didn't have kids to be a grumpy mum. I wanted to be a good mum. I wanted to be a fun mum. And I had realized I'd turned into this person that I really didn't like at all. I was moody, really irritable, raging, as we do, exhausted, just stressed out. Every day was just a massive to-do list. Felt like I was walking through treacle, not really doing anything very well. And just, and I know, now I look back and I think, well, I hear this story all the time. So, we all have a version of this story. So that moment made me want to do something about it. So I went to my doctor, and of course I didn't know anything. So and nor did my doctor, actually, funnily enough, because when I reeled off all my symptoms, he gave me a piece of paper with a Prozac on it.
Oh
And that
no.
was the antidepressant of the day. And I looked at it, I knew what it was. I said, I think that's an antidepressant. Said, yeah, that's what you need. I said, it's not, I kind of know it's not depression. I don't have it in my family. I don't have a history. It doesn't feel like that at all, but I don't know what it is. And he said, no, that's all I've got. Have it, you'll feel better. So I went out of that meeting, that appointment, and I was just like really shocked and upset. And I thought, what, this isn't it. So what is it? So, to cut a long story short, my dad was a hormone doctor. Lucky me, I had a father who worked in this area. You see, I didn't really know it was my hormones back then either. So I didn't kind of make the connection. I didn't know anything about it. So I rang him up and I just said, Dad, these are my symptoms at the minute. I don't know what's going on, but my doctor wants to put me on Prozac. Is it that? And he goes, no, Nick, it will be your hormones. I went, okay. He goes, you're in perimenopause. And I looked at him and went, well, I don't know what. Do you just, I don't know what that word is. It didn't work. It didn't exist back then. 15 years ago, we didn't know what perimenopause, and I'd never heard of it. And all I heard was menopause, and I just didn't know much about that either. But I knew it wasn't happening in my 40s. I had a regular cycle. I had young kids. That wasn't me. So he said, yeah, this is what's happening to your horse. He gave me the education that I never got at school. I didn't get from anyone else. I certainly didn't get from my doctor because he didn't know this stuff either. And I was absolutely flabbergasted. First of all, I was fascinated. I thought, hang on, this is amazing. Second of all, I was really angry because I thought, hang on, why don't we as a race, as a gender, why don't we know about this stuff? Why don't we know what's going on in our bodies? And then that made me really angry. And lastly, I just wanted, I realized actually that if I didn't tell other people and tell my friends what was going on, I was lucky I had the doctor in my family who could tell me and educate me, but they didn't have that. A lot of women, most women. So where were they going to get? So it after a long period of getting myself back better through looking after my hormones and my dad telling me, as a doctor, I was fascinated that he didn't want to put me on a medication. He actually told me how to improve my hormones through my diet and lifestyle and keep supplements. And I'm like, really? It can't be that simple. And he said, it is if you do the right things. And within a few weeks, it was that simple. So much better. My energy came back, my brain fog lifted, my mood stabilized, and even some of the belly fat that I was starting to put on started to go down. And I thought, wow, this is quite powerful. So eventually I went down lots and lots of rabbit holes and got really, really fast with hormones and all of that I really thought, and actually, the anger got built up in me as if to the point where I thought, I've got to do something about this. So I left my well-paid corporate job and went back to college for 4 years to study hormones. And then back in 2014, and I founded For Life, where the last 10 years we've been running a clinic to help women educate and empower them with what they need to be able to look after their hormones and have a better time going through perimenopause, so and beyond.
Yeah, fascinating story, and so similar to so many women in our age group and not being taught these things. And it's kind of like me as a dietitian, like not being taught well about like blood sugar management and actual good nutrition. Like in your gaslight, you go to the doctor and they say, no, they just want to be able to give you a pill and manage symptoms and not actually look at the underlying issue. So I totally agree. Like I'm in the medical field. My mom was a nurse, so I think I had more exposure to these types of things than a lot of people do, but we are doing a lot of this on our own and learning a lot of it on our own, unless it's like you're not going to learn it in school. So unless your mother or somebody in your family or a friend teaches you, you're kind of just left in the dark. So what were the first things? So and like you said, so lucky that your dad was so knowledgeable and able to guide you. That's wonderful. What were the first things that you did? You said like he had you change your lifestyle and put you on some supplements, and obviously everybody's a little bit different. And there's never one set protocol that works for every single person or every woman. But what were some of the things that helped to like get you back, get your energy back and get you feeling better?
Well, I think the things that I didn't quite realize was how much I knew what healthy eating was supposed to look like. I kind of knew that I should be eating all of those things less. I kind of we kind of know that. But what I didn't realize was the impact of things like stress, sleep, movement, and exercise, and your environment as well. And that's what really interested me, because I think, a lot of women know diet is really important, but a lot of women don't know how impactful stress is on your hormones. And I would say now, I trained in nutrition and we looked at, all those other aspects as well. And initially when I started the clinic, it was very, very diet centered and food centered, because that was the thing that and it has a massive impact. But after 10 years of seeing a lot of women through the clinic, I've really come to realize that the impact that stress has. And I really think now that stress is the number one determinant of how well you'll go through, because I don't have proof of this. I didn't do any clinical studies, but anecdotally, the women that were the most stressed and had the most imbalanced cortisol on their testosterone tended to have the worst. So I think I flipped that now into, yes, diet is incredibly important, but stress management is absolutely key. And that's one of the things I didn't really realize was affecting me. I thought, well, I can change my diet. I don't need to do the stress bit. I'm not a stressy person. Yeah, I've been tired and, life is stressful, but that's the same for everyone. And I can deal with it. I'm strong and I don't feel stressed. So when actually one of the things that happened and opened my eyes was during college, when we were learning about testing. They were handing out free test kits to experiment with, and I was desperate to get the gut test. I wanted the gut health test. I wanted to look at my microbiome. I wanted to see, if I had any, like what was going on with microbiome and my gut. But when it came round to it, I got the adrenal stress test, and I thought, oh, how disappointing. I didn't want this one. It's going to be so boring. I'm perfectly not stressed. I'm fine. And I don't really need to do this. And then, of course, the results came out and I was just blown away. I was like, oh dear. My cortisol was pretty much flat on the floor. And I thought, okay, maybe I do have a stress issue here. And, everyone's looking around me going, duh, your life, you are, running around like a headless chicken. I had the busy label, the busy badge attached to me nonstop. I was working in the evenings, all the things that we do when, we're busy, and we are pretty much running on adrenaline and cortisol. That's what we do, and life looked a bit like that. So, and I'd had 2 emergency cesarean sections as well, which are very physical on the body. But I was still shocked, but it really brought home how important stress management is. And I wasn't doing any of that. I wasn't doing any slowing down. I didn't, if you tried to make me sit and do nothing for 5 minutes, I exploded. How boring. But also I feel guilty not running around, and all of those things that a lot of women tell me that they can't sit still because of all these feelings that come up. And maybe it was also a distraction thing, but also the busy badge gives you some kind of false importance in life, doesn't it? You feel important if you're busy all the time. And we are natural people pleasers, so we're wanting to run around and do everything for everyone, and self-care is the last thing on our list generally. So all of that is going on, particularly for women, and particularly in midlife, when we have a look after and a lot of things to do, and the plates spin crazily and lots of it. So I think that's one of the things I learned the most in my dad was teaching. And then, also lifestyle and how important exercise was, but not just exercise, but physical, like daily movement and not too long. And the environment thing, which was a real eye-opener to me in terms of, what are we surrounding ourselves? What are we putting on our skins? What are we inhaling? What are we eating in terms of food, chemicals? Some of that affects your hormones too. So there's a and it was like a sort of jigsaw puzzle almost of things that affects your hormone balance. So I was trying to put the pieces together for me and working out what I needed to do and where the gaps were. And that's what we try and teach women and our clients to do, is to put those pieces together for themselves, because my jigsaw is going to look very different from yours. And so we need to put the pieces in that work for us, for our likes, dislikes, our abilities, our our schedule, our timings, whatever, our circumstances. So whatever that is that works for you, get that in place so that you've got your own kind of toolkit to move forward. But I think there were a lot of factors involved, but those were kind of the...
Yeah, that busy woman syndrome is very, very real. And I went through that myself with 3 children, raising 3 children, feeling like you have to add to your list rather than take away from your list, and checking things off and checking the boxes and being busy all the time because you want to feel important. And I went through that too. And I had flatline cortisol as well when I checked it 1.5 years ago. And I've since balanced it back out. But I had to take a hard step back and really reflect on what was going on with my cortisol and how long, I'd probably been flatline for a long time before I even checked it. And so now that's like my main focus is helping people get their cortisol, melatonin, and leptins back into balance, because those hormones are master hormones. And if you don't have them in balance, all the downstream hormones are suffering. But I felt the same way. I'm like, if I'm not busy, I can't sit. Like, what's the purpose of sitting? And it went more beyond that. It's like you said, it's like you feel like someone's going to give you a ribbon or something if you get through your checklist for the day, but nobody knows except you. And I feel like so many women are in this boat. Like I would feel like, oh, I gotta get these things done, and I always have to be busy. But who is it hurting? It's hurting me and my family. It's not like other people are looking at me and saying, oh my gosh, Janet got a lot done today. Like, I'm so proud of her. No, it's your body and those around you who suffer.
The thing is, what we tend to do is, if we ever get to the end of the list, we just add more stuff. So we end up it's never ending. And we never get that sense of achievement that something's done, because there's a whole load of other stuff that needs done. And then we go around and round in circles. So what is that? Yeah. And I think the more we do as well, the more others expect us to do. So, we create a rod for our own backs. We don't have any boundaries in place. So not surprisingly, we never have any time left for looking after ourselves. And, I think this is the problem when we, the message of, do more self-care. Self-care is great, but if you're putting yourself down the bottom of the list, when are you ever going to get to it? You're going to look after everyone else first and go, do you know what, So it's more a question of prioritizing and getting the mindset right around care rather than trying to do it, because a lot of women just don't get around to it. The mindset, it is the priority. This is the priority above everything else. If you don't look after yourself, you're going to be useless to everyone else anyway, and you're going to become the burden. And that is like the last thing you want to be is the burden, right?
No,
So
I need to be the achiever, not the perfect.
yeah.
I know.
So,
And I have like a to-do list that nobody sees it except me. And I have stopped doing this, but I used to, like, if I did something that wasn't on my list, I like put it on my list and check it off. And I'm like, what is the point of that? Like, nobody knows except me. But in my head, it was like, ooh, one more thing that I got done. And I know for my, bringing my cortisol back into balance, nutrition and stress management played a big role, but also circadian health and proper lighting was what really put me into my healing mode. That and just nervous system, right? My nervous system was shot. I mean, I had to do some work and on that front in order to actually fully heal and bring that back into balance. But I know that you talk about the feisty 4 hormones, and I'm guessing cortisol is one of those, but can you kind of tell us about what you mean by that, and how they come into play as we age?
Yeah, so when we talk about perimenopause, a lot of the focus is on estrogen, our sex hormone. Testosterone is included in the conversation, but those sex hormones that are doing the big fluctuating and declining changes that we see and are responsible for quite a few of the symptoms that we see typically through perimenopause. So the conversation is a lot about that, and of course, the flip side of that is the HRT thing. So we have those hormones that are changing, and then we have HRT that can balance out that hormone shift if that's suitable for you. But what we're not talking about is the 100 or so other hormones that are also affected by that menopause transition, and also affected by your diet and lifestyle and environment. So when I was first studying hormones, I couldn't believe how many there were, because like everyone, I was sort of focused on a few that I'd heard of. But then, when you actually study them, there's so many. There are chemical messengers that run around the body and tell the cells what to do. And each one has a job to do, and they all kind of rely on each other like this beautifully tuned orchestra. And when one's out of balance, they don't sound very good and they don't work that well together. So each one of those can be affected. But as I was reading through all these hormones and getting fascinated by them, there were these 4 that kept coming up time and time again. And it felt like these 4 were kind of responsible for 80% of what was going on, definitely through that perimenopausal transition. And of course, estrogen and progesterone they're one of them. I've lumped them together because and they work together. Cortisol is the other one. So of course, stress has a big impact on how you'll go through that transition, because it affects your sex hormones. It affects your brain and how that works. So a lot of the symptoms that we see through perimenopause, the brain fog, the mood swings, the anxiety, that sort of stuff, and the memory loss can be caused by cortisol, or low levels or high levels of cortisol. So we have to consider that. It can cortisol can suppress your other hormones like thyroid, and it can mess with digestion. We get a lot of women that got more digestive issues through menopause. Again, we don't know if that's sex hormone related or cortisol related or something else. So these hormones kind of really impact each other. So we've got to look at them together. So cortisol is one, estrogen the other, then insulin. Now insulin is a huge one that's through perimenopause, and insulin is our blood sugar regulator, but it also does a whole lot more than that. And we know that it gets released from the pancreas when carbohydrates and protein, and then it comes along, it takes the sugar out of the blood, and it goes to the cells. But during menopause, so estrogen has a big role in how you manage your blood sugar and what we call insulin sensitivity. So how that insulin it works basically. So when estrogen starts to kind of decline, we're much more prone to something called insulin resistance, which I know you've had before. Is it's when your cells become less sensitive, receptive to insulin, and we just can't deal with carbs like we used to. Unfortunately, the insulin receptors kind of shut down, and that leads to more insulin production and to deal with that unwanted sugar, and we get glucose running around and insulin. And this can cause things like fat storing, obesity, risk of diabetes, extra inflammation, because insulin is quite inflammatory, And it can lead to something called metabolic syndrome. So that's a disease. So it's not just a question of, just eating less carbs for the sake of it because you might put on weight. It's actually a question of managing your and insulin production and making sure you don't get to that insulin resistant point. So insulin's a key one to manage, and the way you do that is through blood sugar, not just through your diet though. So we've got to look at what kind of carbs we're eating, obviously, and eating more protein, healthy fats, but also through stress. Now, stress is always impact. Stress hormones actually make insulin resist worse. So they interfere with insulin signaling, and cortisol prompts to release glycogen to the bloodstream. So it just makes this whole cycle a lot worse. So stress management is not only key to how you feel, it's also really key to managing your insulin and making your balancing. So when we're on a kind of blood sugar roller coaster through the day, what I mean by that is you might have toast and cereal or fruit for breakfast, or a smoothie with lots of sugar in. Your blood sugar is going to spike. We all know about how blood sugar spikes. We're so much more knowledgeable about that now. But I still see a lot of diets where we're not quite sure, there's a lot of hidden sugar around, in particularly things like processed foods, and we're not quite sure with carbohydrates, particularly whether they actually break down to sugar, but we don't necessarily see them as the same impact as sugar. So sometimes we're just not aware how much sugar we're eating in terms of glucose. So we might have that porridge in the morning and think it's very blood sugar stabilizing, but you start putting honey or syrup in there, or too much banana or whatever, and your blood sugar starts. So there's things like that. And then once you have that kind of breakfast, you're going to dip and crave something sugary, carby, and then you're on this roller coaster again. So that roller coaster, every time you dip in sugar, you're going to feel groggy, moody, foggy. You're going to be storing fat. And it can even mess with your sleep, because that can wake you in the night. So it has a lot of consequences that you may not be aware of, just making sure that you're. So there's that. And then the third one is thyroid. Now thyroid is literally your metabolism. It's literally the energy that you need, every cell needs in your body to work properly. So when your thyroid hormones are low, it can really mimic the signs of perimenopause. So when you're feeling tired, you're feeling groggy, you've got brain fog, you're feeling lethargic, your hair might be falling out, your skin's not great, your nails are really brittle, whatever. You might have anxiety, memory loss. You might be, suffering constipation, things like that. You're generally slow, and you might be putting on a lot of weight that you just can't shift without starving. Generally, those are sort of some really common symptoms of low thyroid, and they kind of similar to what goes on in perimenopause. So you may not need HRT in that instance. You want to check your thyroid. So I always encourage people to have a look at these 4 hormones and make sure it's not something else other than your sex hormones. Your estrogen, progesterone might be fine. It might be low thyroid. It might be a cortisol issue. It might be much insulin, because some of these symptoms are very similar. So that's where thyroid comes in. And again, the commonality of how the prevalence of low thyroid hormones pretty much after 45 onwards, particularly in women, actually, because it's the autoimmune version passed down through. So we're more likely to thyroid. So definitely, I would just urge people to make sure that they're checking their thyroid quite regularly to make sure I'm not related to that. Right?
Yeah. Yes. And these, I know, like cortisol, insulin, and thyroid hormones, like you said, they're so interconnected. And a lot of times when we have adrenal issues or trouble managing our cortisol, or it's out of balance, thyroid is going to suffer as well. And I have had people go through, I just started a course around adrenal health and balancing cortisol back out. And a lot of times when you improve those levels, because they're, thyroid is a little bit more downstream, a lot of times people see their thyroid improve as well. So yeah, if we're like gumming up the networks and one hormone is too high, too low, there's other hormones that are going to be affected, and it's all one network. And I know even on this podcast, I tend to, focus in more on insulin and now cortisol, but they're all interconnected. So doing things, that's why we talk about the foundation so much. And all the foundational pieces of good sleep, getting outside, getting sunlight, eating well, not eating too often, controlling the blood sugar, they're all foundational to every single hormone. And it's really just kind of where your weak spot is, and what's going to show up for you genetically. Like I just had some really thorough genetic testing done. And there were no big surprises there. And like I found myself, I'm sitting through like the doctor visit for the genetic testing, and it was done through a company who offered to work with me, and so I took advantage of that. But as I'm sitting there thinking, and I was very genetically predisposed to diabetes on both sides of my family, which was not a surprise at all. Like everybody in my dad's family has diabetes, but their lifestyle is awful. Like it's absolutely awful. And I think I was predisposed to dementia, which strangely doesn't really run in either side of my family. But anyway, I was just like, okay, I have all these genetic predispositions, but the epigenetics are really what I want to focus on, like either turning those on or turning those off. And those lifestyle foundations are just so critical. As you said, help you through, like you have those foundations in place, going through transitioning through perimenopause and menopause tends, can't always predict it, but you tend to transition through a little bit better than those who the foundations.
Yeah. And that's the message I think which we're trying to get across is the earlier you start, the better it's going to be, because you can you have a good perimenopause and then you're suddenly in a really good place for aging for the rest of your life. So I wrote my first book. It was all about perimenopause and what I'd learned and these major 4 hormones and how to look after them. And like you said, there are general principles that look after all of them: stress management, diet, exercise, sleep, light, your sleep wake cycle. All of that stuff is amazing, and the right environment too. So all of that helps to balance those 4 hormones. But as you get through, and what happened to me was as I got through my 50s, and I think I was around 52, and as my period stopped and I got into postmenopause officially, because you have to wait here. I don't know if it's the same in Canada or in the USA, but it's you have to wait a year after your final period to be officially postmenopause.
It's
so that day came. Day came, and almost immediately I started getting really bad night sweats, so proper drenching night sweats. And I thought, whoa, hang on a minute, I know how to balance my hormones. What is going on here? And it really floored me, because I thought, wow, okay, so hang on, my toolkit for my 40s it's not quite working for me 100% in my 50s. So I realized that actually once your cycle stops, and your hormones change all the time and they're evolving, and you suddenly then get to a place where you've transitioned through the menopause and it's a whole new landscape. So your hormones are going to settle where they settle, and you've got to then deal with those consequences. So I got to this stage and I started getting these really, really bad symptoms, and I thought, okay, something's changed, something's shifted. What I was doing before isn't quite working to balance whatever's going on right now. And that was quite an eye-opener for me, because I thought I'd got the answers, and I realized then that just, everything evolves, everything changes, your body changes. And what was right for me in my 40s needed adjusting and tweaking. Now I was in a new decade and a new landscape without the cycle, the hormones that before, even if they were all over the place. So I got myself tested. I did the Dutch test because I wanted to know where my hormones kind of settled. And yeah, my estrogen was very low. My progesterone was low. My mum had just been diagnosed with osteoporosis as well. On top of that, my dad, being a hormone doctor, was just such a big fan of bioidentical hormones, have them on the NHS at that point in the UK. So he dealt with all the private chemists and the prescription labs, etc., for that. And I didn't know what they were, and I wasn't really interested, because everything I was doing was kind of working up until that point. So when I looked at my test results and saw the consequences of me not taking estrogen and progesterone and the way I felt, and these awful things, it was a no-brainer decision for me to start taking some natural body identical, we call it here, estrogen and progesterone. And that got rid of all these symptoms, and I got tested a few months later and everything's all good. And it just made me realize, I'm also, by the way, my stress levels were really bad, because we'd just come through the pandemic. We were really, really busy in our clinic, like 5 times the amount of clients we were normally seeing. And we're coming to the end of that. I was pretty much with that. So I kind of think there was a double whammy effect there as well. But it made me realize that I needed a different approach. And I think, we as women, we've got to, like, health is a moving picture, isn't it? So we've got to always be kind of reviewing how we're feeling and is this still working for me, and tweaking it where necessary, and just staying really open and mindful of how things are and change things if they're needed. And it made me realize that I actually there's a lot of other things I need to be looking at in this phase of my life. Longevity is booming. We've got life expectancies now, it's sort of towards the mid 80s. And if we're looking out for ourselves, possibly longer than that, hopefully. So it's a huge, when you finish menopause at 52, 53, that's another lifetime ahead, really, of years. It's a third of your life left. And it made me realize that actually, what resources are there for women post-menopause? Because, yeah, there's a few books on how to age well, but they're possibly not directed at women, really, and how we've just come through this massive turbulent phase of menopause, and then we're like, oh, I'm here now, I'm cruising down the river with a cocktail. No, it's not like that, is it? It's kind of like, oh, okay, now I've been through that, I've got to look at, oh my goodness, look at the health risks ahead, look at the instances of cancer and heart disease and osteoporosis. Okay, I've got to kind of look at my plan and see if it's still relevant for that phase. So my new book is all about this new era, this postmenopausal era, and how to really look out beyond hormones, because yes, there's obviously hormones and you still look after them, but there's so many other things that we need to be mindful of now. We need to look after our heart and our bones, our joints, and everything else. So it's about that, beyond hormones, and our minds as well, our emotional health. So important, because we know that a positive outlook just extends your lifespan. So I think the study that I looked at was a positive outlook on aging extends your life by 8 years.
Wow.
So that's a huge amount of time to gain if you can just have more positive thoughts and a reframe of aging. We're all terrified of aging. It makes us all washed up the minute we. So we can turn that around, and we can see it as a very positive period of our lives where a lot of us are more free, we are more confident, we're more resilient, we're more experienced, we have incredible wisdom to share with the world. And if we look past all the sort of negative stereotypes, we are a powerhouse of knowledge and experience. And this could be the best time of your life if you can adapt, really think about your attitudes, because it has to come from within, but also look after your physical health. So it's about that, really, and really giving women, older women, a resource living powerfully into.
Yeah, that's awesome. And those adaptations can be frustrating. And so you feel like you just kind of figure something out and it's working and you're feeling good and your weight's managed. Cause I know that's always a huge, piece for women, especially. And then boom, like you hit a roadblock.
Yeah.
It's happened to me. I intermittent fasted for 5 to 6 years, like every single day. And it worked really, like it reversed my insulin resistance almost completely. It was a great way to manage my weight. I felt good doing it. And then boom, all of a sudden I had creeping blood sugars happening and I had flatline cortisol, and it was too much of a stressor for me. And I was going about it the wrong way. And it made me mad because I'm like, what? I like this, I like this lifestyle. It simplifies things. It's easy for me. But if I kept going in that direction, I would have really stressed my hormones even more. And now I'm back to where I have like a healthy balance, but I know it's like I'm 48, almost 49. I still get regular menstrual cycles, but I know my hormones are declining. And I've had baselines done of them, and I'm not to the point yet where I need to, I don't need to start HRT. I don't have the symptoms, but I know it's on the horizon for me, and you just have to embrace it. But then I look at, we were talking about the busy woman syndrome. I don't have to feel like that anymore. Like two of my 3 kids are out of my house. They're doing well. It's like you feel like as a parent, you've done your job, you've prepared them for what they need to do. And you just need to embrace it and I think that stigma isn't always, as big for men as it is for women. And I think a lot of it's just we make ourselves feel like that, and we need to embrace where we're at and all of the changes. And I'm glad you've written the book Life After Menopause as a resource. But as we close out, I would love to know if somebody wanted to work with you, like what are the steps and how do you kind of walk them through knowing where they're at hormonally balancing, and how do you work them through your process to get into better balance and to decide what protocol or strategy would be best for them?
Yeah, good question. Well, we have obviously an initial call with someone to see whether we are going to suit them and it's what they need. Generally, we work with testing most of them, so we'll want to test because I find that nobody wants general advice because it's no good for anyone really unless you've got to be really lucky to be able to give someone general advice and it works for them because we're so unique. We all have such unique biochemistries, different levels, different genetics, lifestyles, different everything. So I don't think you can just give someone generic advice and it to work really quickly unless you're super. So we test because we want to know what's going on inside. We want to know what the root cause is. So I mentioned all those different symptoms that could be down to 4 or 6 or 7 or 8 different hormone imbalances. So we test for those. We look at your cortisol. We look at all your sex hormones and testosterone, all your estrogen. We look at nutrient deficiencies. We look at insulin and your thyroid, and we want to see what's going on underneath the surface, so that then we can get to that root cause and have a very direct and quick response because we know where to start. Because I think that's a lot of the problem is you can experiment and go round and round the houses. You can do a lot of stuff and a lot of time and money goes by before you get to actually. So we test and then every single protocol is going to be unique to you because completely on what we find on that. So that's how we do it. It seems to work pretty well, and I don't see anything too much.
Sure. And do you work with anybody online
Yes,
or
been online since day one actually. So we didn't have to do anything through the pandemic. We've always been online because we want to reach people in far out places that can't come to us. And I have a team of fully trained nutritionists who are all trained in this functional medicine approach and the testing. So and they are all remote. They're all over. We want to pick best people, so we have. So we see people from all over the world. The only thing that is a little bit restrictive sometimes is depending on where you live. With a test, we'll always work with you, your local area, and be where the
yeah. Well, it's like we were talking about at the beginning of the recording, just knowing about this and knowing what changes to look for. And, that's a lot of it is just getting women more knowledgeable about this time in their lives. Anything else in Life After Menopause, your upcoming book that you want to talk about or,
I
as we
mentioned,
close?
we've gone through a lot of the physical things and changes that we go through, and the physical hormones may be out of balance. I think, and we've touched on, the stress and the emotional stresses. But in the book, I go into much more detail on how emotional stress kind of affects our quality of aging. So how the mind-body connection works, and how our thoughts can influence our health. And that is an area that I'm so of science is looking at that, what goes on in our mind and how it in fact impacts you. So emotional thoughts, stresses, things like loneliness and disconnection and not being in the dark and too much and sitting too much and all that stuff. But also all those emotions that can consume us, the grief, the frustrations, the anger, trauma, and how that impacts our body, but also from an aging point of view is how that impacts our health and life and health. And there's so many things that we can start doing that beyond looking after our hormones that can influence that and really make that an improvement, whether it's getting help or whether it's just connecting more with other humans, but also nature and our food, ourselves. There's a lot we can do to make ourselves feel better and think more and make sure those years are not just healthy but also happy. There's no point living to 100 if you're miserable.
Right, exactly. And I think emotional stress and just your emotional well-being is so much overlooked in health, and how the disease process is affecting you and how chronic illness is affecting you. It's like we all want to look at nutrition. We all want to look at how active we are. we of course, I think people are coming to terms that sleep is really, really important. You can't, hack sleep. It's just one of those things you have to actually do. You can't biohack it. But emotional stress, and that's something that is overlooked. And I look at, I've seen this firsthand with my own family this year. Like my mom passed in February of 2024, and my dad's always been a very introverted, doesn't talk feelings. We don't know what he's feeling. We always used to call him no stress Steve, because he didn't show any emotion ever. Well, I think he's bottled it all up for so long. And there's some medications that come into play here, but he lost like 100. He was well over 300 pounds. He needed to lose weight, but he lost 120 pounds in a year, and just looks completely different. Like from the time, like I look back at pictures of my mom's funeral up until now, and he looks like, which was about 7 or 8 months ago at the time of this recording, and he looks like he's aged about 10 years. And I was like, wow, okay, like that is that will just go to show you,
Well, yeah.
emotionally, there's probably way more going on with him that anybody knows about.
We see that a lot with older people too, when one's the other one much longer. And
Right.
there is an actual thing, isn't there? There's a syndrome. I can't remember the name of it, but it's can die of a broken heart. So
Yes.
yeah. So
Yeah.
we know that, and we know the whole power of placebo and all of that stuff. There is definitely, but this is an area that's not really embraced the medical world as yet. So, but I think we can be ahead of the game and really look out for that we're emotionally to age better.
Yeah.
And there are some really simple to do. But yeah, I go
Yes.
into that because I
And
think
like you said, when you were going through your mental health issues, or, your work-life balance at the beginning of the podcast, and Holly said, well, just take some Prozac. Like that's kind of the conventional systems way of dealing with it, because that's how they were taught. I mean, we can't like come down too much on conventional doctors, because that's what they're taught. They're taught to diagnose and treat with a pharmaceutical or have a surgery. And mental thoughts, it's so hard because you don't know what's going on with people. You can't like test people's mental thoughts. So I'm glad that there's that in the book. So life after menopause. You also have a podcast called Happy Hormones that has a lot of great information out there as well. So thanks so much for doing all the work that you're doing, and giving women a resource, and hope, and embracing this time of life, and knowing that it can be wonderful and great, like you said.
Oh, thank you so much, Shauna. I've really, really loved talking to you.